On 6 July 1945, Harry Truman stood alone in the Oval Office as dawn crept over Washington. He held a thin briefing folder close to his chest, its pages heavy with decisions that would drag America toward an unseen future. Truman had been president for barely 3 months, the shadow of Roosevelt still looming, and the war refusing to end. Across the oceans, cities burned in Europe and Asia. Millions waited for peace, and commanders demanded answers. This morning, the question before Truman was not just victory, but how America would shape the world after the guns fell silent forever. The answer lay in a secret understanding. Forged with allies and rivals alike, far from public eyes waiting, it was an agreement whispered through cables and conferences. Born of fear and ambition, sharpened by time. In that room, Truman felt the weight of farmers and soldiers, of factories and families resting on his shoulders alone. What he would choose next would bind America to a path stretching beyond the war, into a century of power. As the sun climbed higher, the deal waited to be made, silent and dangerous, and the world held its breath. Behind the folder, generals and diplomats argued over maps and futures, while clocks ticked toward destiny slowly. The Soviet Union pressed westward with bloodied resolve. Britain strained to hold influence, and America weighed its own soul. Every choice threatened to save lives or end them, to secure peace or sow fear. Across generations yet unborn, Truman knew secrecy was its own weapon, protecting strategy while risking trust at home and abroad. This was the quiet moment before history turned, before signatures and storms, before the world changed irrevocably. From Washington to Moscow, unseen lines were being drawn, lines that would define allies and enemies for decades to come. Part 1 ends, but the decision does not. It waits in shadow, demanding a reckoning soon. On 12 July 1945, Truman boarded the USS Augusta, crossing the Atlantic with a silence heavier than steel. Below deck, advisors whispered of Stalin and Churchill, of leverage and fear, while waves struck the hull in relentless rhythm. The destination was Potsdam, a ruined German landscape where empires would bargain amid rubble and ghosts. Truman arrived knowing America held a secret advantage. The atomic project, nearing completion, unseen yet decisive. At Potsdam, the smiles were polite and brittle, masking suspicion and exhaustion earned through years of slaughter. Stalin listened more than he spoke, eyes calculating borders and futures, while Churchill clung to fading imperial authority. In private, Truman weighed whether to reveal power or conceal it, a choice that could alter diplomacy itself. The secret deal took shape quietly. America would delay confrontation. The Soviets would enter the Pacific War, temporarily. In exchange, influence would be traded like currency, across Eastern Europe and Asia, drawn late at night on maps. Each signature meant millions of soldiers spared or spent, cities saved or sacrificed, depending on timing. The conference rooms smelled of smoke and damp paper, reminders that civilization itself was fragile. Truman sensed that cooperation today could breed rivalry tomorrow, yet isolation was no longer possible. As Potsdam ended, the outlines were set, though the public would never see them. Not yet. Ships departed carrying promises and threats, bound for capitals and battlefields alike. The war seemed close to ending, yet a longer struggle had quietly begun. On 16 July 1945, deep in the New Mexico desert, the night shattered with artificial dawn. Scientists watched in stunned silence as the first atomic fire bloomed, rewriting warfare, morality and power forever. News raced across secure lines toward Truman, who was still in Europe, weighing diplomacy against destruction. The success of the test transformed the secret deal overnight, shifting America's posture from cautious partner to looming giant. At Potsdam, Truman's tone subtly changed, firmer and colder, while Stalin noticed everything, saying little. The promise made to the Soviets now carried an expiration date, ticking with radioactive urgency. American planners recalculated casualties and timelines, measuring lives against leverage in grim arithmetic. If the bomb worked in war, Soviet help might become unnecessary, altering the balance agreed upon just weeks earlier. Yet breaking the understanding risked provoking distrust, planting seeds of confrontation before peace even arrived. Truman walked garden paths at night, wrestling with responsibility, knowing no precedent could guide him. The bomb was more than a weapon. It was a message, intended for enemies and allies alike. Stalin already sensed the shift, accelerating his own ambitions, pushing forces deeper into contested territories. What had begun as cooperation now bent toward rivalry, shaped by fear and revelation. The secret deal still held on paper, but its spirit was fraying, thread by thread. As plans moved forward, the world edged closer to a new kind of ending, terrifying and final. The next decision would not be whispered in conference rooms, but announced in fire soon. On 26 July 1945, a declaration emerged from Potsdam, stern and unforgiving, addressed to a defeated enemy. The ultimatum warned Japan of total destruction, though its true authorship lay in unseen calculations and secret confidence. Truman approved the language, knowing the bomb waited, armed and ready, across the Pacific horizon. Behind the public words, the private deal strained further. Soviet entry into the war now delayed by American certainty. Military planners spoke of shock and surrender, of ending the war before alliances complicated victory. In Tokyo, leaders debated survival and honor, unaware that diplomacy had already narrowed to a single path. The clock moved faster than expected. Diplomacy replaced by momentum, driven by technology and fear. Truman understood that every hour spared American soldiers, yet each choice multiplied unseen consequences. The Soviet timetable no longer aligned with Washington's aims, threatening the post-war balance in Asia. Secrecy thickened as preparations advanced, shielding the public from the scale of what was coming. The deal that once promised shared responsibility now became a liability reshaped by opportunity. Across the Pacific, bomber crews trained in isolation, knowing little of politics, everything of duty. History accelerated in those days, compressing decades of impact into moments of resolve. As July closed, the final pieces fell into place, irreversible and deliberate. The world stood unaware at the edge of transformation, waiting for light and ruin. Together. On 6 August 1945, the sky over Hiroshima opened without warning, silent and blinding. In seconds, a city vanished. Lives erased, shadows burned into stone. History was torn apart. News reached Truman at sea, his face unreadable, knowing the secret deal had effectively collapsed. The bomb ended one war while igniting another, political, psychological, spanning generations. Soviet leaders understood the message immediately. America had acted alone, decisively, deliberately. Within hours, calculations shifted in Moscow, urgency replacing patience, suspicion replacing trust. Truman justified the decision as necessity, saving soldiers and ending suffering, though doubts lingered. Behind closed doors, advisors debated whether a second bomb was required or symbolic. The deal's original purpose, shared sacrifice, and stability was now overshadowed by demonstration of power. Civilian suffering remained distant in official briefings, reduced to numbers and outcomes. Across Asia, shock rippled outward, nations reassessing America's role, intentions, and limits. Hiroshima became more than a battlefield. It became a warning etched in fire. The world's balance had shifted permanently, though peace had not yet arrived. As smoke rose, the secret agreement faded into history, replaced by a harsher reality. On 9 August 1945, as Nagasaki burned, the Soviet Union moved at last, storming into Manchuria. The timing was no accident. It was urgency born of betrayal, ambition hardened by fear. Stalin kept his word in form, if not in spirit, seizing territory while the world watched flames. For Japan, the dual shock was unbearable: invasion from the north, annihilation from the sky. Truman observed the Soviet advance with mixed relief and alarm. The old deal was now meaningless. What was meant to limit Soviet reach instead accelerated it, reshaping Asia overnight. Maps were redrawn in real time, armies racing against surrender announcements and political claims. The human cost mounted silently, civilians fleeing, soldiers dying, far from headlines. In Washington, officials framed events as convergence of fate, though rivalry was obvious. The cooperation of wartime had collapsed into competition for influence, raw and exposed. Every mile gained by Soviet forces complicated post-war negotiations, raising stakes dramatically. The bomb had ended resistance, but not mistrust nor ambition. As Japan faltered, the next war's foundations were laid quietly, methodically. The secret deal was now a relic, overtaken by events it failed to contain. Peace was approaching, yet the world felt more divided than ever. On 15 August 1945, Emperor Hirohito's voice reached the Japanese people. Fragile, historic. The war was over, though the meaning of peace remained uncertain, heavy with loss and fear. In Washington, bells rang softly, yet Truman felt no triumph, only consequence. The secret deal that once shaped strategy now echoed in diplomatic fallout, unavoidable and global. Allies began reassessing America's intentions, power displayed without consultation or restraint. The Soviet Union consolidated gains rapidly, securing leverage before negotiations could freeze borders. Europe and Asia entered an uneasy calm, scarred and suspicious, watching new lines harden. Truman addressed the nation carefully, framing victory as sacrifice, necessity, and resolve. Behind the speeches, planners turned toward containment, security, and dominance, new words for new anxieties. The atomic monopoly was brief but transformative, altering diplomacy overnight. Nations understood that war had evolved, and survival demanded alignment or resistance. The deal's failure taught leaders that secrecy carried long shadows. What ended as cooperation concluded as division, shaping the post-war order. The human cost lingered in ruins and memory, far beyond treaties. Peace had arrived, but it came armed. On 2 September 1945, aboard the USS Missouri, surrender papers lay beneath a quiet sky. Cameras clicked and pens moved, while unseen tensions settled into the bones of the moment. For the public, this was closure. Yet for leaders, it was transition, uneasy and unresolved. The secret deal's consequences were now unmistakable, shaping occupation and influence worldwide. American forces moved to rebuild Japan while guarding against ideological drift. Soviet power solidified across Eastern Europe and Northern Asia, momentum hard to reverse. Former allies now spoke cautiously, measuring every word and gesture. The bomb hovered over diplomacy like a specter, redefining deterrence and fear. Truman approved policies aimed at stability, yet rooted in suspicion. The wartime alliance had dissolved into strategic distance, formal but hollow. Each nation sought security through strength, abandoning trust. The deal that once promised balance had delivered division. Across devastated lands, civilians rebuilt lives under new flags and futures. The war's end marked the beginning of an era shaped by anxiety. History closed one chapter while opening another, darker, colder. On 12 March 1947, Truman faced Congress with a hardened resolve, shaped by war's aftermath. He spoke of threats and responsibility, of aid and intervention, redefining America's global role. The secret deal's legacy lived on in doctrine, policy, and posture, now public and permanent. What began as wartime necessity had evolved into ideological confrontation. Former battlefields became front lines of influence, contested without open war. The atomic shadow framed every decision, amplifying fear and urgency. Allies looked to Washington for protection, while rivals prepared for resistance. Truman's words signaled commitment beyond oceans, beyond isolation, beyond retreat. The world understood America would no longer stand apart. The deal's collapse taught that power, once revealed, could not be concealed again. Diplomacy now rested on deterrence, not trust. Nations aligned, divided, and fortified, responding to lessons learned in secrecy. The human cost continued, measured in anxiety rather than casualties. A new conflict had begun without a declaration. The choices of 1945 now governed the future. On 4 April 1949, signatures gathered again, this time in Washington, under a colder sky. The North Atlantic Treaty was born from memory, fear, and lessons carved in secrecy. America stood at the center of a new alliance, no longer hesitant, no longer distant. The secret deal of 1945 had reached its final consequence: permanent leadership through power. What Truman once weighed alone had become national doctrine, shared and enforced. The atomic age reshaped strategy, binding allies through deterrence rather than trust. Former partners accepted America's dominance, preferring protection to uncertainty. The Soviet Union responded in kind, hardening borders and intentions. The world settled into balance, tense and armed, defined by unseen red lines. The human cost endured quietly, families divided, nations frozen in rivalry. History would debate morality and necessity, but the path was set. The deal that changed America's role in the war had changed its role forever. From secrecy emerged permanence. From choice emerged empire. The war ended, yet its echoes governed decades. This was not an ending, but a foundation built in silence.